Hi, this is Brian Field with Provence Technologies, and today we're going to talk about ServiceTeam ITAM and very specifically the discovery integration concepts where you may take advantage of integrations with tools like Azure Intune or System Center Configuration Manager and how ServiceTeam enables that integration and exposes the data within your ITAM or ITSM applications to help asset managers and technicians perform their functions. So before we jump into the demonstration, I want to go over some IT service and asset management capabilities as they relate to Service Team. And where I want to draw your attention here is to the ITIL best practices. In each of these areas, whether it's incident management or change management, or you're managing service requests for somebody who wants an IMAC-D type activity, or event management, all of the asset data, which also is referred to as a configuration item, is available and can be related to tickets. So you can always have that full picture of how your CMDB relates back to your IT service management processes. Now, supporting that process or those processes and the configuration items and the assets, that records that you're looking at, is integration with the Azure Intune or other Azure components or System Center Configuration Manager, but very specifically discovery tools where you can get tactical information, technical information on assets that will be combined with how you are tracking from a very traditional IT asset management perspective, from a financial perspective, from a contractual perspective, from an assignment perspective, and from a life cycle perspective, right? That very traditional ITAM approach. Now, with the service team and the offering that we have something called the Provence Services Platform. And it is basically the integration engine that we use. Now, there are other purposes for it. We can bring in and do bring in contact information from Azure Active Directory, the people that you're supporting. So you have that universe of users out there. Perhaps you want to use it for your DevOps processes. So integrations with DevOps and Jira are available, or event management. So lots of different things that the Provence Services platform provides with respect to bringing in or communicating with third-party applications to Service Team. Now we're going to focus specifically on Azure and or SCCM here today, but this is how the application is constructed to be able to bring everything together here, as you'll see here in a moment. So let's jump over to the application itself, and I'll give you a high-level overview of the asset management program, because I think it's important to understand, again, that relationship between that ITAM record and that record that's discovered. And they're two separate records that we have, both CIs, but they represent different things with respect to how you manage. So from that traditional ITAM perspective, here's where we're now going to track the life cycle status. Is it installed? Is it stored? Is it disposed? Is it retired, etc.? We're going to track things like the asset type very specifically and how old that asset is. So if you're a refresh planner, all right, I've got this data here now that I can use to my advantage to identify the assets that are aging out of the program and be able to drill into these charts as well and see the data that's driving it. Or I might want to understand how I'm using assets from a designated use perspective. Is it a production loaner, test, UAT, development, various aspects there. So providing a little more color commentary on what the asset's all about. And then finally, the readiness status. So it's one thing to know something, for example, is stored, but but it can be stored for a variety of reasons, right? It's stored and it's available. It's stored and we're using it for parts, or it's stored and it's in repair, or it's stored and we're preparing it for retirement, right? So as you're looking at your inventory of available assets, and maybe you're trying to fulfill a request, looking at the fact that it's stored is usually not enough. All right, you need that little bit of extra detail in order to make that happen. So that's part of it, and lots of elements that I talked about with respect to ITAM program. We'll take a look at some of the others here as well. The assignment perspective to individuals, for those that it's relevant to. That you might have servers or others where they might not necessarily be assigned to an individual. They might be responsible parties, but depending on how you want to configure that, that may be handled slightly differently. But suffice to say, you can assign it to individuals, you can assign it to physical locations, you could assign it to departments, or cost centers as well. Now, speaking of cost centers, that financial component of managing an asset, how did I fund the purchase of this item, and how much did it actually cost, and which PO was cut, and then over time maybe. And you want to look at very specific cost events, one-off expenditures that you make in support of this particular application. So here we're adding a component, or it might be uncovered technical services, because perhaps agreements that you have in place have expired or don't cover something that you need to do. So things like your warranty coverage period, and how you can relate it to an asset to different types of contracts, like a extended support agreement or a lease or a disposal agreement, anything that you might have that you want to associate this asset to. So very traditional ITAM, right? Life cycle, assignment, financial, contractual. But then we want to talk about that data that's coming here from Azure Intune, and how does that play into the overall concept here? Well, what you'll see is this device CI. And again, this is now the representation of the data using the Provant Services platform, that integration engine I was describing, to bring in data and to relate it to your asset management record, if you will. So the way we relate it is by matching serial number. So we take the serial number, you've received your asset from your vendor, you've created it in advance, you put your agent on there, you begin managing it in Intune, the connector picks it up. We're going to now take that data from the connector, from your Intunes of the world here, get the serial number that should be captured there, and tie them together. A pretty straightforward process, but now we've made that relationship between the asset management record, and there might be one universe of people who are really focused in on that primarily. Now, there's different elements they can use, certainly, as they're looking at refresh again, might be another element where they want to look at this more tactical data. There's some of this more technical data, right? But now we can get into that discovery data. So the information that we can get from the discovery tools to provide a little bit more detail than you would get necessarily as part of an overall ITAM program. So things like perhaps IP address, or principal name, or processor count, or memory, or if the user affinity is enabled, we can capture that information. Now you could have checks and balances perhaps between what your discovery tool says is who they're representing as the primary user versus who you have captured as the current assignee. Oftentimes that's a good way to look for process breakdowns where something just didn't get updated properly on either side. It's potentially can happen. The operating system. So bringing that again, that tactical information that technicians can use, perhaps before they go out into the field and service an asset, depending upon your support model, or if they're trying to troubleshoot issues with respect to something that's installed on that device, this could all be very helpful. So it's all there and available at a conch for technicians to use. Now, if this happened to be a mobile device, a smartphone or a MiFi or something like that, it would capture additional information like IMEI and SIM and phone number, et cetera. Right. So we bring in a lot of data from the discovery tools, and from experience. We brought in the data that people tend to look at. However, the integration can be modified quite easily. It's XML based, and we can bring in additional attributes should you need them. So quite flexible in what we're doing. But the key here is we have this discovered data represented as the device CI, which is related to the asset management record, that full on asset management approach and discipline that you want to apply to your ITAM program. Now, I want to give you one use case here very specifically with respect to how this data can be used. One of the elements, and let me go back here very quickly, is the last discovered date. So here in the last 3 years, roughly, been a change in how people work. They're all of us, including myself, work from home either exclusively or in some sort of a hybrid model where it might be 3 days or 4 days at home and 1 day in the office or something like that, right? So now there are challenges for asset managers and being able to understand where those assets are, because they are either deployed and can't be seen because they're in somebody's home, or they're very mobile and they're not something that comes into the office frequently, or again, many cases not at all. So how do you track that? Well, one way to understand at least if the device is still out there is that last discovered date. So you could use very simple techniques like a view here, and views are there are lots of views available out of the box. These spreadsheet oriented type views that you can have, or what I've done is I've created a view of my own which said, hey, show me all of the assets that have not been discovered in the last 60 days, meaning, Intune, it hasn't checked in there, or config man, and it could be a red flag. Now, there's lots of reasons for that, right? I mean, maybe somebody's on extended leave, or something like that, where they would not necessarily have been using their computer. But it could also indicate process breakdown, where we have not indicated that these items here, there's a series of items that you can see on the list, haven't reported in since November. Well, maybe they've already been retrieved and our asset management process broke down, right? Or as part of an offboarding process, we forgot to go and get Tammy Howard's asset before she checked out on her very last day. So, it's not that, it's just a tool to use to help you identify anomalies in the data that can help you and benefit you in improving process, or to actually pursue an asset that you should have, but you have not currently retrieved. So a great practical use here that's really raised itself to the forefront here in the last 2 or 3 years. So hopefully the session was helpful. You can understand how ITAM records and records coming from Intune are represented, how they're tied together, and how you can potentially use that in support of a variety of aspects from a more enterprise support or services perspective, from ticket management to HR to very traditional, again, ITAM, where you're looking at refresh processes, et cetera. So thank you very much for listening, and we If you have any questions, please reach out to us here at Provence Technologies. Thank you very much.